All right, welcome everyone. Today is kind of a special edition for us. It's our first time we actually get to talk about blacktail, which if you're anybody from the west side of the states, you know what we're talking about when you get kind of that fever to go out and the weather starts turning a little bit and you've maybe already killed a nice bull or not. But now's the opportunity to get out there and go start trying to kill what we would consider a nice blacktail, but as Jake would always say, any blacktail is a nice blacktail.
Yes.
But he will be the first one to shoot anything as well, so we're not sure if that's a good thing or not. So I want to introduce you to Jake Siegel and John Eastburn.
Hi, guys.
I see you guys are sporting some nice gear there. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I like that. Maybe the host gets a free hoodie after the show type of thing.
I don't think so, Jeff.
Okay, that's fair enough. Half price is fine. All right, so first thing we're going to do, guys, make sure that you text in Go Live to 77453. And what that's going to do is make sure anytime we have these unique events or maybe we launch a bow here in a month or so or less, you'll be the first to know about that. And you can join us here in studio and ask us questions. The other thing is, anybody who's joining us now, we have Instagram running. We also have our Facebook pages running. And ask some questions and make sure we answer those live with the two experts in the blacktail hunting side of things, and we will love to get those answered for you. So, with that, let's start out with a few questions for you, Mr. Siegel and Eastburn. You have something there, John?
Oh well, I was just I was listening to your introduction, and thank you for having us. We're very happy to be here, talking about a subject that is so near and dear to our hearts and a lot of other people's hearts out there in the Northwest, I'm sure. But you may be asking yourself, experts, who are these guys? What or who said that these guys are expert in blacktail hunting? And the caveat I would say to that is we've made a lot of mistakes, a lot, and in those mistakes.
John, we're going to keep this to blacktail hunting.
Oh, just blacktail hunting?
So
okay.
Not just life.
Where are we?
In general.
That's a different
Where are we
episode.
at?
We can do the life one later.
This is safe.
So in this
room.
short time we have together, hopefully you can learn from some of our mistakes, and that equates into some success. So,
Well, good.
Yeah, experts in the very loosest form of the word.
Yep, and that's I would say that's for everybody in this room. So we're doing all right. Well, let's kick it right off, guys. So if you kind of look at the breakdown of blacktail, you guys kind of identified a few core areas where you're going to see a different type of blacktail, and let's just talk about those first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, just like whitetails, the whitetail you find in Texas and the southern part of the states, compared to the Midwest, and even West now, and then in Canada are kind of. They're definitely different types of deer. So, and the same thing you see with blacktail. While not as widespread, you still see a different type of deer. Obviously, just to find a blacktail, you got to be on the West Coast. All the way up and down the West Coast, you can find blacktail. Being from Oregon and hunting here in Washington, Oregon, you do kind of have two different types. What we kind of consider a valley buck, which if you run up and down the I-5 border. So if you're not familiar with the West Coast, basically like Seattle, Portland, Eugene, Sacramento, all the way down there. Those are your kind of your valley deer.
So you're just on the mountain ranges, basically splitting your bucks.
Right, and this is specific to the Columbian blacktail. There's two subspecies. There's the Sitka blacktail, which you would find in southeast Alaska and British Columbia, but which I have never hunted before. Someday maybe, but. In terms of this conversation, Columbian blacktail deer in the geographic areas that Jake just talked about. So, and like he was saying, there's not actual terminology out there that hey, this is a valley deer, this is a mountain deer. This is kind of slang, will you, for local jargon for where these deer are.
But is there a difference between those? So if you're new to the area and you're just getting into blacktail hunting, which a lot of guys are, and there's a big interest. I know we've all kind of hunted all over the United States, and people always go, can I go out there and hunt blacktail with you? Yeah. And it's not that easy as, you have a stand and you go up and you go, great, I have this buck over here and this buck comes in here. But is there a big difference between the actual animals from, let's say, a valley buck or maybe potentially a coastal buck to a mountain buck? What are we looking at between those three?
The difference you're going to find, first of all, is elevation. So the valley deer, I mean, you can kind of figure, they're going to be found at lower elevations, a lot of private land. Their food sources are a little bit different because being in the valley, you have, a lot of farmlands, a lot of crops. So, these deer are going to be typically a little bit more like your whitetail as far as where they live and how they eat and how they behave. The higher elevation deer, the mountain bucks as we like to call them, usually see it's just a little bit more of a shouldery buck. They're just bigger. They live in high elevations all the time, so their way of life is a little bit different.
Yeah.
So their food source is different. But man, they grow some big bucks up there.
So if your mountain buck's going to be a bigger buck, not just body-wise, but what about rack size? Does that typically go hand in hand, or
Generally, you always have those, phenomenons out there where some guy kills a huge buck. Which, by the way, if you don't have blacktail, I believe to enter a buck in the book is 95 inches. So Pope and Young. So we're talking just so you get a general idea of horn size here.
Mm-hmm.
So
we have one right here. So
there you go.
And that is what do you think?
we'll say first of all, it's a valley deer.
Yeah.
Shot that just not too far from here, and that's a pretty typical representation of a nice.
That's a mature buck.
Mature buck, yeah. So what he scores, I didn't put a tape on him, but I mean that's a nice buck. So I think
you wouldn't pass this up.
I will not
in the valley.
No.
Most people probably wouldn't even come close to passing this up.
No. To each their own, but yeah, it's a nice buck for sure. So,
yeah.
But that's kind of a typical representation. As you get higher in the elevation, you see the mass. You see more mass on the bucks, and it just depends. But they just seem to be a little bit a bigger deer.
Yeah.
That
makes sense. I mean, for equate it to areas, and you were from the Midwest, Jake.
Mm-hmm.
Equate it from some of those different kind of areas or territories where you see bigger bucks, and it could be a state over, and all of a sudden these bucks blow up in size and body and rags. That's kind of similar to some of the blacktail environment.
Yeah, the genetics in that area
Right.
just naturally are producing bigger deer, but not bigger bucks, but also bigger does.
Yeah. Talk to us about if
huge
someone's
fawns.
huge fawns.
Huge fawns.
Yeah.
I
Big
wonder if
bone
anybody's
fawn.
ever shot like a fawn thinking, anyway, well, a different story another time for John Eastburn. But what about mapping? If people are using nowadays, you mentioned, Jake, especially in the valley, there's a lot of private property, and this may be the same true for a lot of people in California region all the way up to Washington, where you're kind of bordering BLM or even some Forest Service or things of that nature. It seems as if the things, and everybody has them on their phone, Hunt Stand and Onyx, and there's a bunch of them. I didn't mention names, sorry, but that seems to be a good way, at least to get people started, to start to look at those areas, and then we'll get into what are they looking for once they get to those areas. But have you guys had any experience with some of the mapping?
Well, I would say, those definitely come into play. More for when you're talking in the valley area on where to hunt is where not to hunt. You don't want to be on private property and get in trouble because a lot of it, there's no fence lines, there's no break-in habitats, so those are definitely going to help you out there. Google Earth is also a really good tool in finding areas that are going to look bucky or deery in the future. But as far as finding a spot, well, let's talk about the valley first, I guess. In far as finding a spot, to go, generally speaking, you're going to hunt clear cuts, and clear cuts are logged areas, and that is for typically a spot and stalk type atmosphere. You can, if you do find a hot area or hot trail, you can throw up a stand, but that is where the concentration of deer are going to be in the valley, unless there's fruit around this time of year. Then you won't have those fruit trees, but that is where you want to start. That's a good starting point. Find 2-3-year-old logged areas. Sit down, spend some time there behind the glass, and try to find some deer.
I mean, nothing helps better than getting with someone that has actually had some experience in that area, even if it's just for a day or two, and getting an opportunity to go, hey, kind of walk me through the ropes if they're willing. I know it's a lot like fishing sometimes, where it's like, well, can't show them all the spots type of deal, but
Finicky.
It can
folk,
be.
Yeah.
But yeah, to John's point, you got to just look. You got to get out there. You got to look through the maps, make sure you're not on private property lines. We do have a couple of questions that actually came in, but I'm going to reserve those because they feed right into the next subject matter.
Okay.
And that's, well, you know what? We'll ask the question because it will lead us into that.
Proceed.
Where do you like to hunt? This is from Jared Hutchinson. Jared Hutchinson, we just gave you $25 Bowtech apparel. We'll get you a gift code. Facebook us. We should take care of. Where do you like to hunt blacktail in the late archery season in November time? Do you want to go up high? Do you want to go down low? And I know you mentioned something earlier, Jake, about maybe how the season's coming together with the weather.
Yeah, so we had mentioned that the two type of deer. I think for like this question, just because valley deer, you generally don't see as much movement with those deer, just because the concentration is usually a little bit higher. The food sources are a little bit more consistent. So those deer you can kind of hunt similarly as you would, a whitetail, where they're going to react the same way in November.
Right.
So there is a bit of a difference though on these high country deer. And so to Jared's question, which is a good question, and that's usually the first question you hear from somebody that is either coming out on a hunt or is new to the area, like, hey, where do I start? And I was there, 10, 12 years ago when I moved out here. I was like, I was overwhelmed.
Right.
So luckily had some people to help me out and kind of went from there. But usually, so if you're looking at high country, high elevation, these deer live throughout the summer at a very high, these bucks live at a high elevation. They're very nocturnal animals. I would say even more so than a whitetail. You rarely ever see them in the summertime. Even in the late summer, early fall, they're very, very hard to find. So when the rut comes around, like most other species, you do have an increased chance of seeing these deer. Weather plays a really big part of that. The more snow on a good snow year, as we say, the guys in this room definitely know we've had those good snow years where you see a lot of snow at high elevations. Well, naturally, the does and the bucks have to move down to find, to get below that snow level to find food. And with the does come the bucks. So if you can follow that snow line, if you're fortunate enough to be in a good snow year, usually your chances go up dramatically. So in the mountains, find that snow line. Sometimes you got to go up pretty high to find it.
And so here's a little different. Maybe it's not the same in some of the Midwest where you don't have a huge elevation change across the state. But in the Blacktail region here, we're going all the way from the valley here is about 450 feet or 475 feet or so. And I know
5,000.
we'll go up to 5,000 plus in some areas.
Yeah.
But 5,000 is a good kind of the high peak area for it. But that snow level, it can change here overnight, and you could have it dumped on for a weekend, and it turns into prime hunting time. So, but does that snow, when that snow is pushing them down, is it a combination of the fact that they're losing their food source potentially, so now they're having to find a new food source, they don't have their same bedding habits that they had previously, and like you said, when it's in the rut, they're doing one thing's on their mind, and they're going to act similar to a whitetail, maybe not quite as aggressive as that, but you put those three together, and that starts to make the perfect storm with the snow. It's really a perfect storm.
See what you did there.
See what you did. Nice. So that's a lot of country to cover but it kind of, if you think about it, that elevation really helps you a lot, because now if you're, like you mentioned, Jake, if you're kind of at that level of where it's huntable, it's not too much snow, and you're pushing those deer down, all that area above now becomes almost unhuntable because there's not as many deer in there.
Concentrates the deer.
Yeah.
Generally, those deer in those higher elevations, they're going through their rut phases that time of year, but they're migratory deer, right? So when there's weather, there's snow, we better get down to, our wintering grounds. And so, you're exactly right. They're migrating, and it's concentrating.
Right. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the rut, and we had another question in here is, this one's from Nick. How much different is hunting blacktail deer than hunting muleys in Colorado? I know you both have experience hunting in Colorado as well. And are their rutting behaviors the same? And maybe we can share just the difference, because a lot of people are watching this are probably whitetail hunters. A lot of people are mule deer hunters, and then not as many blacktail. Maybe you can explain kind of the different rutting behaviors between the three that you see here, and answer his question directly. I guess is the second piece. Is blacktail deer hunting different than muleys in Colorado? We'll start with the rut question.
So, I say the biggest difference, and jump in here if I'm off on this, but I would say the biggest difference between the mule deer rut and the blacktail rut is you don't have that concentration, that herd of deer when you see mule deer together. And again, it kind of depends. Mule deer cover a very vast landscape, so I'm thinking, and I'm not sure exactly where he's talking about, but when you think of your stereotypical rut hunt for a mule deer, a little bit more open spaces, colder weather, so those deer are starting to concentrate together. So you'll see multiple bucks in a herd of deer. Blacktail still a little bit more solitary. So, and again, it's just because of the broken landscape and you know, again, these high elevation deer, you're hunting in some really steep, gnarly, nasty areas. Think, you know, I mean, if you've watched any outdoor TV, usually every once a year somebody puts a blacktail hunt on to fill a spot. So,
Yeah.
but it's like rainforest, right? So you just can't see very well. So generally, if you're finding a buck in the rut, you know, you'll see a buck. You know, maybe you'll see two, you know, 10 minutes apart, you know, following a doe. So the difference being in the two rut environments is one environment, period. It's just harder to see.
Yeah,
so,
habitat
yeah.
oriented.
Yeah.
Well, in your whitetail scenarios, I mean, we've all sat in stands where it's just like, this is crazy. There's a little buck comes through, and then another buck comes through, and it's not a shooter. And for Jake, it's shooter, shot.
Definitely.
But
Buck down.
Freezer,
talk
freezer,
about
freezer.
talk about a different experience, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we've actually all had the opportunity to hunt together,
Yeah.
kind of down south, and it's very interesting to sit there and watch and go. You're almost going to the guys, whoever you're hunting with, going, "Are you sure you can't shoot this buck? Are you sure you can't shoot this buck?" Because the population seems to be so high, and in that rut, man, they are just chasing does through there crazy. That's not the same experience necessarily in the blacktail world. Well, if you had, you know, a buck or two come in, or you saw, like Jake said, it was one was chasing a doe, you're fortunate to get to see multiple bucks in your morning hunt or your evening hunt.
Yeah, just to reiterate, because of the habitat that they live in, you know, thick, nasty stuff, and then population, right?
Yeah.
There's not as many, the densities aren't there, typically speaking, with the blacktails.
Yeah.
A lot of blacktail hunters, if you're hunting out of a tree stand or even still hunting, we're talking days before you might see a deer.
That doesn't sound like
It's
fun.
brutal.
Come on out to Oregon.
You're
It's brutal.
gonna love it.
But there are those days, just like, you know, with mule deer and whitetail, where you get that magical day and you see two deer.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the prize of it, is when you get the opportunity to finally harvest one. It's a pretty cool thing. I had one thing in here. Blacktails are sneaky. Yes, Darren, they are. And then Darren also asked, any hints on the 2019 products? I'll give you a hint. We're going to have 2019 products. They are, I'm going to say this, there's actually a couple of them. You're going to like that. The flagship's going to blow you guys away. It's pretty awesome. And maybe it has a partner with it as well. But that's all I can say about that, or I get in trouble. You were going to add something to that, Jake?
Well, one thing that kind of resonated with me when I moved out here, again, because I moved from Wisconsin, which obviously completely different environment, was, and I think hopefully will help the folks that are listening and watching, is you guys, we've all watched the History Channel and saw all the logging shows. What are those called names? Axemen, yeah. So logging is huge business out here. And blacktails and a lot of other species love loggers because they create an amazing habitat as far as you know, new food source. So not only food but cover. And that's one thing to the question that came, I think, from Jared earlier on, as far as like where to hunt these deer. You know, logging, if you can follow the logging that happens, obviously when you log an area, it comes back in stages, and you know, you can see cuts that have happened 25 years ago and some that have happened 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And you know, there's the kind of that magical area and that time frame when those deer love a size of regrowth, because it provides a lot of cover and a lot of food
source.
Mm-hmm.
We actually, I apologize. I thought there wasn't as many questions, and I was scrolling the wrong way. There's a lot of questions, so we're actually gonna hit those questions real quick, and we won't spend as much time on it because I want to get through quite a lot of them.
Okay.
This is from Miles Kendrick. Miles Kendrick, see this new gear, Miles? I'll buy it. I will buy this. You message us. I'll get you some of this new gear. My treat for you. And maybe that one's more expensive. Maybe a t-shirt. Maybe a t-shirt. typically, are you doing spot and stock, or do you typically sit in a tree stand when you're blacktail hunting? And maybe this is different from the environment where you're hunting valley compared to mountain bucks, but I can just assume if there's no levels going down and bucks are moving and your stand's up there, it's not going to do you much good when it's covered in a foot of snow.
Yeah, 50-50, I would say, and it all goes back to habitat. In an area, if you know that there's good buck bedding and it's really, really thick, but there's also does in there, maybe it sets up next to a unit, that might be a spot where we would choose a tree stand sit. Especially in a clear cut that might be 2 to 6, 7 years old, has a lot of feet in it, that butts up next to dark timber or timber that is big enough you can get a tree up in. We call that reprod, and generally that's 10 to 20-year-old trees. So that would be a circumstance where we would pick a tree stand, just because you can't sneak through that. But if it's rainy and you have some cover, some sound cover, and you're hunting an area that might be a little bit more open, bigger timber up high, or spot and stock, if you can find deer in a clear cut before those early light hours or late in the day, then it's a spot and stock game.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that I would say is you had mentioned the deer density isn't nearly as much as blacktail necessarily, and also there's a lot of big open country, and you're looking at canyons and ridges and mountains.
Yeah.
If you can spot and stock some of that, you can glass a deer up across the canyon, is a great feeling because you found one. But then the real hard work comes in. You can close that distance to that 200 yards, but after that, the environment changes so rapidly. I think that is probably the most difficult situation to be in, is to close the distance on a mature buck. After first he's probably getting a little spooky. He's been out there for quite a while, but he's trying to get to bed. But that doesn't give you much opportunity in that. But you don't have a lot of options if you're in certain countries because you can't be sitting in a stand necessarily. But it seems almost as if some of the valley stuff, since it's kind of dense little areas of private property and others, that seems to be a stand-oriented locations. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say that's definitely true, because of the habitat. Like you say, the deer in the valley, they don't move much throughout the day. They can literally bed, feed at night, and go back to bed and water within 200 yards in a lot of cases, just because it's so plentiful. So when those
I would spot and stock that really hard.
Yes, and you would do it in about 5 minutes. You'd high step through there and get your buck,
and everything's gone. I'll just blow them all out.
You want to get as close in as you can, and then get a stand up.
And that's all about probably very similar to whitetail hunting. It's about easy access in without blowing your deer out. Make sure the wind's right, but you're not pushing that little territory. Maybe you're hitting little border areas or whatnot. Good questions, guys. There was another question here. This is from Stacy. Stacy, I will also buy you one of their new shirts. We'll go through that here. You have to Facebook us in. Our guys behind the camera are laughing at me because they know it's a chore to do that. My treat on me /Bowtech. And that is going to be, so what's the difference between a blacktail and a mule deer? And we get that question a lot here, like, oh, you guys have mule deer over there, blacktail, right? Same thing.
Yeah.
Well, no, they're not. But John, I know you've hunted mule deer quite a bit over your years.
Yeah.
What have you seen? Let's just talk about the pure genetic of it for a second, and then we'll just talk a little bit about the activity on the two differences.
And if you could use the scientific names for both, that would be great.
Yeah.
Oh, I actually knew that at one point.
This is where the expert.
But it's one of those deals like if you don't use it, you lose it type of deal. From a genetic standpoint, they're very, very similar. They actually are the only two deer species, as far as mule deer, whitetail, blacktail, that can hybridize. So they can breed together. A mule deer and a whitetail, generally speaking, very, very unsuccessful, even in closed environments. Something about the synapses and the hormones and the genetics not linking up just doesn't really work. All that.
But they try.
But they try.
Okay.
Oh, they try.
Doesn't stop them.
Oh, they try.
But specifically speaking, in Oregon, California, Washington, there's a mountain range, the Cascade Mountain Range. Anything generally to the east of that mountain range is going to be a mule deer, and anything to the west to the coastline is going to be considered a blacktail. Horn-wise, they look very similar, but the farther you get, apart from that point on the map, the distinctions become pretty evident. You know, mule deer is going to have pretty wide ears, where blacktail is going to have ears are going to be closer together. But hopefully that answers.
Yeah. And larger. I mean, mule deer are much larger.
Yeah, you'll see that body-wise and rack-wise typically, it seems like. This is kind of an interesting one. This gentleman actually lives close by here, but and this is just from your experience, I know that you probably have multiple cameras out already. Make sure you turn them on. That's always a good start. You've had that before. This gentleman's name's Eric. He says, I actually work right down the road from you guys. He says he hasn't noticed any bucks movement this year for the last 3 or 4 weeks. He's running 8 cameras in kind of the foothill areas. He says, I'm sure it'll change as the rut gets closer, but it seems odd. And I think when he's saying I'm sure it changes, like more of I hope it changes, because that's the case. But that kind of comes back to your point, potentially, of the weather patterns and the warmth, how warm it's been, and kind of those type of things as well. But maybe there's more to it than that.
So he said foothill areas?
Yeah, he hasn't seen it as much. He's actually in the Lebanon area, which is just...
Sure.
Yeah. Well,
exact location was...
hopefully Eric realizes by submitting this question, it's an automatic invite. We would love to come out with you, Eric.
Especially with that many cameras.
That's a really good part of the state. But Jake is kind of experiencing the same thing right now.
Yeah, for sure. So Eric, I feel your pain, and this is a safe place. You know, it's just more of a support group. Things will get better, I promise. Listen. So got some property myself, just a few acres out of town, and it borders some BLM, and a lot of deer. I see a lot of deer all year in my yard. They're around, but I generally never see any bucks except for the 2 little spike buck brothers that keep eating my plants. But the last 2 years I've been in your shoes, man, and it's a bit discouraging until about right now. I just checked my cameras a couple of days ago, and there was finally some bucks on there, and not, decent bucks. And there was a small buck in my yard the other day, like that I hadn't seen before. So more so than whitetails, and I can't speak to mule deer as much because I haven't lived around them or hunted them as much, but these blacktail bucks just seem to hang tight until right till the very end. I mean, when those does start to come into estrus, boom.
And when is that typically here?
You should start seeing activity like end of October, and then all through November. November should be really, really good.
I saw on the weather forecast we're potentially going to get some rain tonight. I would be willing to bet once that rain hits, because we've been in a dry spell. It's been really nice and hot. Once that weather changes, it'll start happening.
There's another question about since rain is water, and then there's a question about water sources. We know from experience a lot of the whitetail areas, they're going to be back and forth from a water source or have to hit that water source. And so if you kind of find that area and you have the ability to get to it, that's great. The question they have is blacktail, do they operate the same? Can you kind of hunt the water source, or do you want to look at that a little bit differently?
I wouldn't put as much being in especially in later in the year when we get so much rain. There's water everywhere.
There might be maybe in like Northern California on a drought year, there might be a circumstance where you have deer coming to a water hole on a consistent basis. But as far as Oregon, Washington are concerned, on our driest years where we've been way below our rainfall expectancy, I've had no problem finding water, in little creeks and drainages. They don't need much. And so having a spot where a deer's going to be consistent it's going to be really tough. Yeah. So I wouldn't put much weight in hunting water.
This might help Eric out. It said Justin says here he saw the first buck chasing a doe 3 days ago. So that maybe it's warming up just a little bit.
Does Justin say where he's at?
He's going to send me coordinates off
South Texas.
Off South Texas. That's a little late.
A little early.
Josh says he killed a buck with this rain last year.
Nice.
Last year. They're both great bows. I mean, they'll kill anything. They apparently do. There was another question, and you kind of answered this a little bit, John, but it was, will the blacktails run with the mule deer, or will they only kind of get together during the rut season? And that is from Cindy.
So there's so to answer your question, Cindy, that's a good question. the geographical barriers that we're talking about, the Cascade Mountain Range, they're pretty big. They're pretty big mountains. So generally speaking, you are not going to see that too much. However, on a very small level, there has been blacktails killed on the other side of the mountain, and every year you hear of one or two muleys that get shot. In southern Oregon, where the elevations are kind of more, they aren't as drastic, and maybe a mule deer came over, but generally speaking, no, you don't see them running together. I mean, the species, we're 150 miles probably separating the two, and there's a big mountain range in the middle, and so generally.
But you do see influence. You'll shoot a mule deer buck or a blacktail buck, and of course, we're all experts at that point after it's underground. You're like, man, it's got some mule deer influence in there, some DNA in there.
Yeah.
I'm sure there is, maybe at some point, but
yeah, it seems very distinctive. Like I know you and I kind of hunt. All of us actually hunt mule deer in the early season, and it's just different environments too. Like you guys had mentioned.
Way different habitat. Yeah.
There's a good question here about if you spot a big blacktail in person or on camera. In person,
we'll call you a liar.
I like how I said that, Gary. That's good. You know, if you're going to say you saw a big one and nobody saw it besides you, they're going to question it. So, can you assume that he will always be in that general area? That's probably a two-part question. And what do you think their range is pre-hunt? And then what do you think their range is during the rut? Now, that's a big difference in
changes.
So kind of set it up a little bit, Jake. You're the whitetail expert. Is kind of double expert. That's pretty impressive, actually.
It's on my card.
Yep.
It's on my resume.
Let me see that resume. So just put in perspective, like, what would you see that in the whitetail world? What is there, if you saw a big buck in that general area, was there a good chance that you would get to see it again? And during the rut, how far is that whitetail potentially going? And then bring it back to the blacktail.
Sure. Well, there's always exceptions to this, right? I mean, you're always gonna hear that deer, especially in whitetail, because whitetail deer are tracked so much more throughout the year, and they their characteristics are so like that's the deer I've been watching all year, right? So from a whitetail standpoint, generally with the food sources that they have, they don't go very far either. Come the rut, you have, I would say 5 to 7 miles is usually kind of like they'll definitely move, And again, it depends how many does there are and like how dominant they are. If they don't have to move, they won't move.
But you hear a lot of guys that have you have multiple cameras. You're like, man, I saw this buck.
He's
and
over here, and then
2
he's
miles
over
away. But you're right; it kind of stays in that circumference.
I would say so. Bringing it back to blacktail, you could probably in the summertime you could even probably bring that even a little bit tighter.
Especially if they're mountain bucks because they're not moving as much.
Yeah, they just don't have to, and that's the other thing is like with these high elevation deer, they don't get any pressure generally. You don't have people pressure.
Yeah.
So they just don't. To John's point earlier, they have food, they have water, they have cover. Why would they go very far?
Right.
And they shouldn't. Now, when it comes to, it's hard to tell for me anyway, and John can if he can chime in on this with blacktail because you don't have that. You generally don't track those deer all year, and that's kind of the beauty of blacktail hunting. You kind of never know what you're going to see. You can see monster bucks at any time, right? I've never seen that buck before in my life.
They continually.
He's itching. He's itching to talk.
No, I'm just hearing you. I mean, Jake's right.
I want to go hunting right now.
I have done some studies for my own benefit and friends and family, but. If you're talking about valley deer, because you got to break them up again because they act a little bit differently. So the valley deer, during the summer months, we're talking clear cut areas. There's lots of water, lots of food. You don't see the bucks and the does together so much. You'll have those bachelor group of bucks, and that can be as far as maybe a mile apart. Here's a good example. I'm thinking of a place, half an hour south of here, where we have multiple cameras deployed for 365 days, and all summer long you'll have bucks on a little bit higher in elevation, maybe in a unit, bachelored up in velvet, and a mile away, maybe a little bit lower, there'll be does on these cameras, and for whatever reason they're
not mixing.
They're not very much, and but a home radius of a buck, down lower where there's lots of cover isn't going to be that much. It might be a mile or two.
So that is kind of a difference in
Yeah.
between the two. So it's not too far. So I guess his answer would be there is a decent chance you would see that same buck in that region.
Yes, especially if he hasn't been bumped, by pressure.
Yep.
Obviously there's lots of other things that go into it, but
Darren's got another question here. It's and then we'll get to some fun clothing stuff. It looks like here, guys.
Sure.
Are they hunted as hard as mule deer and whitetail? I'm used to mule deer getting pushed out their comfortable areas during the season. I think what he's asking is if you get pressure on them, A, do they get as much pressure as someone hunting mule deer? And B, if they do can you expect if you bump a mule deer out, you might get him back a week or two later on camera if you're lucky.
This is late season hunting, or is he thinking
Let's
like
go
early?
late season because that's kind of where we're headed to.
Okay.
And then, a lot of times this is where you see bucks go forever.
Yeah.
You might not ever see these bucks again. Do you experience the same in blacktail? I know it's different between valley and a mountain, but let's just say mountain bucks, where it's going after the big boys here. If you bump one, is he just gone, or is there an opportunity maybe you can hunt that same area again next weekend type of deal?
What we've seen, and John I know will attest to this, because there's been, we have had a couple of those bucks where we've seen year after year, and we've been able to identify what they look like, a unique characteristic. Blacktails seem to take any advantage to go nocturnal. If you give them one, they will take it. I don't see them as much like a whitetail where they'll just like vacate the area completely. Like they'll move 40 acres and like that's their home now for a while. From what we've seen on camera, and a lot of it is what you see on camera, and which is awesome, is those bucks will come back relatively soon, but it's hard to get them back into a daylight pattern. If you're over a hunting spot, and they, again, given that reprod and the cover that they have,
Right.
they can do so much rut activity kind of undercover. They'll just do that, and then you just won't see them as much. What do you think?
No, yeah, absolutely agree. Now, both deer, if it's in the rut, if they're truly like rut crazed, and you bump them in the act of a doe, and they're in that rut trance, mule deer or blacktail, they're gonna go where she goes. So in a lot of cases, was there a doe with that buck, and did I bump her, or did he actually win me? Or see me in that case, and then they're not going to go far, like Jake said. They don't have to go very far to feel safe. They just go in another quarter mile or 100, 200, 300 yards, and they're in a thicket, and they feel great. Where mule deer might go farther distances because he has to go that distance
to feel like he's got
to get into those aspens or that place where he feels safe. So.
I see you guys are very passionate about blacktail hunting. I know I've hunted with you guys, and you've kind of left me behind in the hills. You got a little bit better physical conditioning. That doesn't take much, though. I'll be honest.
Legs.
It's the short legs.
I've never seen so many inhalers in my life.
Oxygen.
Or
It's just
excuses.
straight
Like
oxygen.
rattling around in the pack. What is that?
What is that sound? And it's 100% oxygen. It does work if you need it, and I highly recommend it if your tree stands over 20 feet, because that is hard to get in sometimes.
Yeah.
But you guys have a passion for blacktail hunting, and I can see that you've carried that over into, it looks like, a business now. If you guys want here in a second, I know maybe you guys, I'll do some giveaways and I'll pay for them again. I know they're like, don't give it away, we gotta sell this stuff. But I know you guys are doing very well already. What do you guys have? It looks like Praying Man Outfitters. Cool logo, by the way. I like that. And then you have blacktail specific cut type stuff. Tell me how this started. What is this all about?
How did this start? That's a good question. Necessity. But we had, so we started a podcast like 2 years ago, and the genesis throughout that was always like, man, we'd really like to get into apparel because as hunters and just outdoorsmen in general, we love to fish too, and shed hunt and camp, whatever. We saw an opportunity to, and again, not a necessity. It's like, man, I want to represent what we do, right? And whether I'm going out to eat with my wife and kids, or we're going shopping, or whatever, just sitting around the campfire, like you want to represent what you do and not always wear camo or maybe something that's
Wife doesn't always like
not,
camo.
although
all the
camo
time.
is kind of trendy,
Yeah.
sometimes it's not always for. So anyway, so we had the idea to come up with a clothing line, and after the podcast got going, we transitioned from the Crave to Praying Man Outfitters, which was our outdoor apparel line. So that's where we are. The Blacktail stuff,
You got another shirt back here. Grab
Yeah.
this one here.
Blacktail.
Short legs and short arms. Can't quite. I got it. Just
You got
try to
it.
tips of the finger. It's just. Oh, you got even a nice little logo on the back that you don't see that all the time. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Front of this is very Blacktail specific, very clever with the antler. I see what you did there.
Blacktails don't get a lot of love.
No, they don't.
So we wanted to make sure that they were well represented in a cool way. So yeah, we do have a couple Blacktail specific pieces, but elk and sure, there you go.
Right on that monster. What else do you have? Anything else you want to share with us?
So if you go to prayingman.com, www.prayingman.com,
Praying with an E.
with an E,
Just like
P-R-E-Y.
a hat. P-R-E-Y.
There's lots of different offerings on there, and here's just one of many we have. This is a Hunt Oregon shirt. We're Oregon boys for the most part. Jake's an Oregon boy now, even though he's from Wisconsin.
10 years in, I think it qualifies.
yeah.
You just have to. He still
Yeah.
doesn't want
It's
to claim
tough.
it though. That's interesting.
Kicking and screaming.
Yeah, so that's a Hunt Oregon shirt that's been really popular, and all these are done on high quality garments.
Yeah,
these
this is
are
nice.
these
This
are
is
really
kinda
soft feel. They're poly
Good
cotton
feel.
blends, and we are. This is all this stuff's made here locally.
Well, let's
So-
we got. Let's do this. We'll show a couple of those, and I think you guys have maybe potentially a little offer you can provide those guys. So stay with us.
We made.
But let's just run through them real quick. Might as well show these designs off. We got a chance here.
Yeah, we brought a handful. So we have the Oregon. Like I said, there's more on the website, but
Hold
this
on
is
front of Jake, and we'll get the camera.
Bring
We'll get one
cover
of our
my
guys back
face.
there right in
That's-
front of
that's
Jake.
the
best
And the
thing.
best thing
Yeah.
to do is keep this up above.
Right in
there
front of
you
my face.
go. Don't see
There
his
you go.
face. You're good to
Yeah.
go. So that's cool. I like that. And it's healthy. Seems like it. Can I get one, John? Staying with the elk thing?
yes, elk theme, lifestyle type stuff, and
Clever.
It's
I like
nice.
that. Good work.
To John's point too, I mean, we're doing all the printing here. We're trying to keep it as much local and in the States as possible. So even the hats, we're using a local company that produces hats. We're printing everything ourselves. John's finding out that all the work that Nate and I did on the back end with website and design, now it's his turn
That's
to
not
do
why.
it.
I know Nate as well.
Yeah.
And when you say Nate and I did on the back end, is that more Nate did?
Nate's standing behind the camera. At least Nate, give me some love. Come on, I did a lot of work.
He did good.
All right.
He's paying him under the
I
table.
will give you that 20 later. So.
Here's some cool stuff, guys. Right out of the gate, Rob Knight's like, oh, and there's like 15 H's on the O, so he's very serious about it. That's pretty cool. He says, like that shirt.
is there a question mark?
No. And then Brian says, I like the logo. I think that's that Praying Man logo, which is freaking sweet.
Thank you.
I like that a lot. That's cool. And then Micah says, need to get some stickers with Blacktail. Everything seems to be whitetail, but I think that's coming,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
You guys have that,
Yep.
maybe?
Yeah.
No, we do not have it, but it is.
But it is.
Yeah.
Trademark.
Mhm.
You can't. Nobody else can do it. Let Praying Man do it. And then there's some cool hats you guys have going on there, and I see you're
Mhm.
going with that that popular camo. That's pretty neat looking as well.
Mhm.
But do you guys have any promos you want to offer them?
We do. So
John's like, that's cutting into margins.
yes,
but
it is.
wait a second.
We're running a business here, guys. Use anybody that's watching or watches this. Use the promo code Hunt Fish Prey PREY, and what is it? 10% off? 100%? That's too much.
100
That's too many zeros.
Take
10%
one
off.
off.
So use when you go to the shopping cart, just in the promo code, use Hunt Fish Prey PREY, and you get 10% off. If you have an issue, we're on social media, so obviously check out our Facebook page, like us. It makes a huge difference. If you guys can get on our page and like us and promote us, we'll continue to. Here's the other thing. We are the fact that we are doing everything in-house gives us the ability to change things quickly. So if you have something that you want to see, the Hunt Oregon, we have Hunt Oregon, Hunt Wisconsin. We obviously there's a few more states out there that we want to represent as well. So let us know what you want to see. If it's Montana, if it's Texas, Florida, whatever. Let us know and we'll try to
I
make it
got a
happen.
couple here. Matthew says, I love the Eat Elk shirt. That's a good one. Yeah, Gary says the John shirt will fit me just I'm sure of it. So John's a wide guy. So Gary,
Husky.
This
Good
is
job.
a 4XL. So if you're a 4X guy, then it might.
so no, this has been cool, guys. I appreciate it. And I'm glad to see you guys took a passion for what you do and turn it into a business and put the two together. And now you guys have a passion business.
Well, we appreciate you having us on. One thing I'll say, finally, just to kind of
That was
bring
really
us back
short on you appreciate
to
it, right?
we appreciate this
Moving on.
platform.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I wanted to say, and it's more of a bow tech thing, is I found this out very quickly when hunting blacktails. A lot of times, I don't want to say a lot of times, I would say 98% of the time, your shots on a blacktail are not going to be a flat shot. So, make sure what I'm saying is when
you're
you're
tree stand, or you're talking to actual
obviously
environment
tree
that you're
stand.
hunting.
No, your elevation changes, your side hills.
Side
are big
hills
ones.
probably-
So when you're practicing,
So we're like this
when you're practicing like this,
and like that.
like this, when you're practicing with your realm or your rain, whatever,
Or Romex.
or your destroyer 350, or how far back can we go? Patriot,
Mighty Mike.
Mighty Might, or your rascal.
Samson. There's a lot of
whatever,
You know
whatever
your-
bow
you
you're
guys know your
shooting, it
bows.
doesn't matter. Just seriously, it's take the time to shoot some side hill stuff. Keep an eye on your bubble. Like, take your time. If you can't do it yourself, go into a shop and get your axis fixed so your bubble is true, and practice, because it just stinks when you.
Have you had experience with this?
Several?
And so
yeah.
what's the like, what Jake's referring to is that it's so steep in some of these
Mhm.
areas, and you're shooting down it,
Mhm.
and you think you're level,
Mhm.
but when you start to go down, you actually aren't level anymore, and it can make a big difference on shot placement when you don't have all
Yeah.
those things true. And when you're typically practicing, it's like most people. They go out there, they put a
Mhm.
target out at 20, 30, 40, 50, 60
On flat
yards
ground.
here on
Yeah.
flat ground, or maybe it's sitting up a little, and you shoot that all day. And
Yeah.
if you've even just gone on a little bit of an angle and do that, you go, oh, my bubble, I didn't realize that.
Mhm.
Imagine, you doing that at a
And it's
much
not as
more large
much.
scale.
I can see where you're going probably.
Yeah.
It's not as much like downhill and uphill.
It's side hill shooting.
Yeah.
When you're on a steep side hill and you have to shoot an angle, whether it's not straight up or straight down. If your third axis is off on your sight, you're going to get left or right impacts depending on
Mhm.
what kind of hill you're on. So that's a good tip. Even if you set it
Expert.
before elk season, double check it right now. There's a lot of good resources online just to, Google, third axis adjustment. But what I would suggest is call up your local dealer, say, hey, do you have time if I was to bring my bow in? You could, set the third axis up on my site. And if he says yes, if he's not slammed, perfect. Take it in there if it's not too far and get that set, because there's lots of ghost or sad stories out there of people not being successul because of that reason.
Yeah.
Did you say there's a lot of ghosts out
I
there?
almost said, because I was thinking of ghost
Part
buck.
of the reason you
Ghost
don't...
buck.
Ghost buck. Oh,
I was thinking of, there's
Got
another
it.
story in my
you're
head.
going to freak
That's-
people out. We had to
Yeah.
come blacktail hunting, and there's ghosts. It's not good.
It's Halloween.
We had a question
Yeah.
again. What is the website? It is prayingman.com. PREYING man.com.
Yeah.
Right.
You can get there. And then Justin has a good point to what you were mentioning, Jake, is there's a lot of challenges and shoots out
Mhm.
there that you can go do.
Mm-hmm.
And I would highly recommend that. The first time you do that, it's going to be a good experience. It's going to be an eye-opening experience for you as well.
What he's referring to is 3D shoots. 3D shoots,
In the
or
hills.
just hill shots. So.
All right, guys. Well, appreciate you coming by. Remember, text in Go Live to 77453. And anytime we go live, you'll get a notification. We'll send it to you via text. And make sure you take a look at this. We love to support people that are active in the archery community and supporting archery. Glad to have Jake and John on board with us here today. And look at this cool stuff. And don't forget the promo code is Hunt Fish Prey, and you get 10% off of this stuff. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, you bet. It's a strong shake.
That's right. Broke your hand.